Mastering IELTS. IELTS is one of the major English language assessment exams out there in the English-speaking world. Some people mispronounce it. The right way to say it is IELTS, which stands for International English Language Testing System. Together with TOEFL, these two mammoths of the English language assessment world work together in the English-speaking community to assess one's ability to communicate in academic and non-academic environments alike. There are several types of IELTS, which are based on what you want to do with the language, where you want to use it, to find a new job, to further your education, and whatnot. That's why those types differ. Opening doors, creating opportunities, IELTS, the test that sets the standard. It is accepted by more than 9,000 organizations worldwide, including educational institutions, governmental bodies, companies, and immigration offices. Hopefully, it is considered to be consistent and fair to everyone, regardless of age, gender, race. In other words, it is quite neutral. The exam is endorsed by thousands of experts from universities, professional bodies, government agencies, and employers. So, all of the above indicates that this is something to be taken seriously. Like I have already said, it is designed to assess the English language ability of people who intend either study or work where English is the primary language of communication. This exam is required by certain world-famous universities, usually with an indicated band score. That is to say, a number that is an accepted one in this or that institution. Well, the following slide demonstrates the point that I have already underlined. Pronounce IELTS correctly. Don't make the following mistake. As for the partners of the IELTS exam, I have to say that it is jointly owned by three bodies: the British Council, the University of Cambridge, and IDP, which is an organization in charge of providing employment in the English-speaking world. Coming up next, one of the most important points out there, test types. IELTS can be taken in the following formats: IELTS Academic or GT, General Training IELTS, which is, I have to say, a tad bit easier than the academic module, which is education-based and education-oriented and prepares you for the world in an English-speaking of an English-speaking university. These modules are similar in many aspects, but different in the rest of them. And this is something to be taken into consideration when you bear in mind whether to take the academic type or the GT type. And here comes the basic structure of the IELTS exam, the full parts all together: listening, reading, writing, and finally speaking. And that is the order in which they come. On the following slide, you can see that if the listening and speaking modules are the same for both types, main differences cover the reading and writing sections. The text will differ, and the types of things you'll have to write in the writing section in both tasks, and there are two tasks in the writing section. They differ as well. On the following slide, you can see the procedure of IELTS taking. 4 parts. The part that comes first is the listening part. It'll take about 40 minutes, 30 minutes, the actual listening process, and the following 10 minutes will be necessary to transfer your answers to the answer sheet. The second, subsequent part is reading. 3 parts, usually 3 texts, and 1 hour to cope with the task. Thirdly, writing, which will also take you an hour, and finally, speaking. In general, the exam will take you about 3 hours totally, including a break, and the speaking part might be taken on the same day, or it might be taken with a slight delay before or after the main part of the exam. How it will be done depends on the country where you take the examination, on the local conditions, and on the test center, on the particular test center where you take the exam. As for Russia, there is an issue that unfortunately stops a lot of students from taking the exam. That is the cost. Currently, the cost of IELTS is about plus minus 14,000 rubles. It can be taken all year round in a wide variety of testing centers throughout Russia. The registration takes place online, and now there is also an opportunity of taking the test on a computer, even though before it was only paper-based, but technology is not at a standstill, it is constantly developing, and now more and more opportunities can be offered to the test takers, including the computer-based version. What about the results? Usually, the test results will arrive in about 13 or 14 days, and the test results will be valid for 2 years, tops. Unfortunately, when the 2-year period expires, the validity of your certificate expires as well. The band score, a certain number, would be awarded for each module, and the total band scores range from 1 being the lowest to 9 tops. Unlike other Cambridge exams, there is no passing or failing mark, but the levels will vary. On the following slide, you can see the band scoring scale. Like I said, ranging from band 1, which is an absolute 0 or a non-user, to band 9, an expert user. And I have to say that expert users are quite rare, whereas band 7 is acceptable by the majority of universities. Bear in mind, it's very important to know the exact band that you have to be aiming for. This band can be found out from the organization that you want to join as an employee or a student. Very often, people who want to study for IELTS begin somewhere around band 5 and strive to move forwards. But band 9 users are pretty rare. Elaborating on the point system here, your band scores can be halfway between the two, expressed in 0.5. That means that you might get 6.5, 7.5, 5.5, but it will never be, for example, 5.75 or 8.25 or anything higher than 9. That is a no-no. Now then, let's begin discussing all the modules and all the test sections in greater detail. Like I said, the section that comes first is the listening section. As for the duration, the approximate duration would be 30 minutes plus 10 minutes to transfer your answers to the separate answer sheet. There will be 40 questions altogether, 10 questions for each part. And those questions will range from multiple choicing, matching, labeling plans, maps, diagrams, completing forms, notes, tables, flowcharts, summaries, sentences, and even providing short answers to questions. As you can see from the slide, completing something is quite common in the listening part of the test. There are 4 sections altogether. The first section comprises a pretty much everyday conversation between a couple of people. It might be somebody calling a university helpline, it might be someone making an inquiry, whatnot, but it is usually colloquial. In section 1, spelling is particularly important, so you might get a telephone number to note down, you might get a surname or a proper name, and bear in mind, try not to make any spelling errors because that would be heavily penalized and your points might be severely taken off. The second section, unlike section 1, is usually a monologue which is said in an everyday social context. Not too difficult, not too academic. The third section is basically a conversation of a group of people, this time in an educational, training, or academic setting. And the fourth part, usually the most complicated and the most difficult of them all, is a monologue given on an academic subject. It might be a lecture. Usually it is a lecture. And mind you, those lectures can be pretty complicated, ranging from archaeology to social studies. So be prepared for everything and have a lot of practice in advance. The more you listen before the test, the better results you're bound to get. On the following slide, you can see the band scoring for the listening module and the relation between the number of the correct answers you get and the band scores you'll obtain. The next question is, what are the skills that will be assessed during the listening part of IELTS? Firstly, that is understanding main ideas, the gist. Secondly, understanding specific details, facts, specific information. Secondly, that is recognizing opinions, attitudes, and the general purpose of the speaker, reading between the lines, which is a hard skill to master, but not insurmountable. And finally, you have to be able to follow the development of the argument, the opinions of the different parties that are involved in the conversation, and the way their opinions might change in the course. Well, that is mostly all I had to say about the listening section for now. Moving on to the second section, the reading section. The reading test will take you up to 60 minutes, but be careful. This time there is no transfer time available. You'll have to answer all the questions in the real time. There will be 40 items and 3 texts to deal with, which are pretty long. The questions range from multiple choice, identifying information in the most classical way possible, true, false, not given, identifying writer's views and claims, agreeing or disagreeing with the writer's points, matching, a lot of matching, information, headings, features, sentence endings, and last but not least, completing sentences, completing summaries, notes, tables, and so on and so forth. The academic reading test in the academic module is slightly different. All the texts will be authentic, taken from books, academic literature, scientific journals, magazines, and newspapers. So the content will be quite elevated. And even though complicated it is still written for a non-specialist audience. That means that most test takers would be able to understand the gist, hopefully. The text will range from descriptive and factual to discursive and analytical. So get ready to come across anything as far as stylistics go. The text might contain also non-verbal materials, such as graphs, diagrams, pie charts, bar charts. Don't be afraid to come across one of those when you do the reading task. On the following slide comes the band scoring for the academic reading module. You can have a quick look at it, the correct answers, and the corresponding band scores. Coming up next, the general training reading test. The text here will be slightly less complicated and slightly less academic. The first two sections will contain several factual texts relevant to everyday life in English-speaking countries, whereas only the third section this time will contain one longer, more complex text on a certain topic of general interest. Nothing scientific this time. All the texts, once again, will be taken from authentic literature, books, notices, advertisements, company handbooks, newspapers, and finally, official documents. So a lot to choose from and a lot of practice to go over during the preparation process. Once again, band scoring for reading module GT. Correct answers, band scores. Clear and simple. The next question is, which skills will be assessed while you do your reading? Firstly, reading for gist, the main ideas, reading for detail, and those will require both skimming and scanning reading techniques. Understanding inferences and implied meaning, reading between the lines, getting inside the subject, which contributes to deeper understanding of the topic. Recognizing, being able to recognize the writer's opinion, his attitudes, his purpose, and finally, your ability to follow the development of an argument will be also tracked and checked. Coming up next, the writing module, which is also different in the two separate test types. Usually, the writing test comprises two tasks. Task 1, a shorter but slightly more difficult one that lasts 20 minutes, and task 2, which lasts approximately 40 minutes, 60 minutes altogether. Be careful to stay within the limits of the word range. It's minimum 150 words for the first task and 250 words for task 2. You shouldn't write too little, otherwise you'll lose your points. Writing too much is also unadvisable. The most important thing probably about the academic writing test is its first part, or task 1, in which you'll be given a table, graph, chart, diagram to note the main features of. In this case, your little essay will have to contain 3 main points. Firstly, comes the overview, which is usually one single sentence that contains the main ideas of the graph provided. Then the second paragraph, which should concentrate on the main features and tendencies of the given graph. And thirdly, greater detailization. Stick to this plan and your chances of success will skyrocket. Secondly, in task 2, you'll have to write an essay responding to a certain point of view, argument, or problem. Those essays can vary, but in every single one of them, you'll have to give a lot of reasons and examples or try to solve a problem. Sometimes you'll have to be able to provide arguments supporting or not supporting a certain viewpoint. Both of these tasks should be completed and written in a formal style. The British take their stylistics very seriously, so make sure you differentiate between the formal style, the neutral style, and the informal style. Otherwise, problems will ensue. Moving on. Coming up next, an example of the first task of IELTS academic writing. Here you can see a graph, and graphs are really very common. And this graph depicts visits to 2 new music sites on the internet. And the task is to write a report for a university lecturer describing the information shown below in minimum 150 words. A very, very, very typical task. And task 2, which you should spend about 40 minutes on. It's about the British elderly people who should pay for the elderly care, the government or the family. When dealing with this task, make sure you include a lot of relevant examples and explanations from your own knowledge and experience, and write no less than 250 words. In the general training writing test, you'll be presented with different tasks. The first task is usually a letter, which might be personal, that is to say informal, semi-formal, or absolutely formal. Think about all the letters you had to write in your life. Letters of complaint, letters of application, informal letters to a friend, they might all come in handy. And in the second task, you will also have to write an essay in response to a point of view or solving a problem, but this time your style and tone can be slightly less academic than in the academic section. So you have more freedom to express yourself. Here's a common example of writing task 1. If you take a look at it, you can see that what's required of you is actually writing a letter of complaint to the shop manager. Quite a formal letter with a very consistent layout. The skills assessed in the writing module usually include the content, what you write about, the way you organize your ideas, your accuracy, and the way of using both vocabulary and grammar. Since both writing and speaking belong to the productive category of activities, there are certain criteria that you should know like the back of your hand by heart. Very important criteria that will have a direct influence on your total band score. First of all, task achievement, then grammatical range and accuracy, cohesion and coherence, and finally, the lexical resource or vocabulary. Let's take a closer look at all of the above. Task achievement in general training refers to using the appropriate style and achieving the purpose. It is also related to the word count. In the academic version, it's more about presenting the key features, giving a clear and concise overview in part 1, and of course, the word count again. Coherence and cohesion refers to the way you organize your piece of writing, your paragraphing, and of course, using linking devices, which everybody are so crazy about when it comes to examiners or mockers. Your lexical resource, the vocabulary you used. It's all about using appropriate language, collocations, and minimizing the number of errors. And finally, grammar. The more complex grammar you use, the more varied structures you use, the higher your band score. And of course, don't forget about the punctuation and the amount of errors you make. Be clean, be precise, be careful. The speaking module. One of the most interesting modules out there. It is also a module that usually scares people the most, because even if you take the computer-based version, you'll have to face a real examiner, and all the speaking part will be recorded for future notice. It will include 3 parts. The first part, the easiest part, is known as an introduction. In it, your identity will be confirmed and the interviewer will ask you a couple of general questions, quite personal questions about yourself, about your probably profession. It could be something about your hobbies and interests and certain familiar topics that might come up. It will be informal, but it doesn't mean that you should speak too little. Try to give extended responses without excessive showing off. The second part will involve a cue card, a certain card with a task. You'll receive the task, then you'll be given 1 minute for preparation and probably making some notes on a piece of paper that you will also be given, and then up to 2 minutes for actual speaking. Then the examiner might or might not ask you some additional questions on the topic. And finally, part 3. It is a two-way discussion that lasts about 4 or 5 minutes. In it, you will be asked further questions related to your previous cue card. Be careful. This time the questions will be more abstract. They will require your ability to speculate, to find solutions, and to give your opinion on quite difficult issues. During the speaking test, a wide range of speaking skills will be assessed, including your ability to communicate opinion and information on everyday topics and experiences, your ability to speak in a more detailed manner using appropriate language and organizing your ideas coherently, and finally, your ability to explain and justify opinions, your analytical thinking, your ability to discuss and speculate. Just like in the writing section, this time in the speaking section, there are also major key criteria to be taken into account, which are equally important. And the first criteria is your fluency. What is fluency? That is the ability to talk at length without pausing and hesitation. Nobody will really appreciate you arming and stopping all the time. Self-correction is acceptable, but not too much. Anyway, it's always better to correct yourself than to make a mistake and leave it at that. Your ability to be understood. And finally, your ability to use a lot of linking devices. The lexical resource, it involves the range of your vocabulary. You'd better use less common phrases. The examiner won't appreciate you saying words like nice, fine, interesting, or difficult all of the time. You have to show that you're acquainted with a range of collocations and idioms. That would be greatly appreciated. And of course, avoid common errors. Grammar range and accuracy. It assesses your ability to use a range of sentence structures, grammar tenses, conditionals, etc., etc. And avoid errors. Avoid errors, ladies and gentlemen. Pronunciation, last but not least. That's a very debatable point in modern linguistics. Present-day scientists, they tend to conclude that accents are okay in the majority of cases, and you should be proud to be, for instance, Russian, or you should be proud to be French. But at the same time, your accent should not interfere with the clarity of your expression. That is to say, you should be understood no matter what. You have to be able to use the right stress and intonation and accurate word and sound pronunciation. So you can stick to your accent. If you cannot get rid of it, no need to use RP, but still be understood. The next important part concerns the kind of materials you'd better use to prepare oneself for IELTS. There is a widest variety of them, a real ocean in which it's far too easy to drown. So I'll try to single out probably the best ones out there, at least the one that I personally truly love and adore. Firstly, the official Cambridge guides to IELTS for both academic and general training. by Pauline Callan, Amanda French, and Vanessa Jakeman. This is a great textbook that touches upon all the 4 sections of the IELTS exam. It has answers and it is great for advanced students, officially approved by Cambridge University. If you need some actual practice, switch to these little jewels. IELTS practice tests from 1 to 13, the latest version. That is to say, version 13 is probably the best one because it's the freshest. In these little jewels, you can find examples of past papers that were really present at the IELTS exam, so you can get a hands-on approach and get practical. Check yourself using the answer section and get the hang of it, to cut a long story short. The in-use section is truly priceless, whether it's English collocations in use, grammar in use, or vocabulary in use. Felicity O'Dell and Michael McCarthy did a really great job for fluency and future IELTS success. So on this slide, we can see a great book, English Collocations in Use, that studies the way words go together in the English language. English Vocabulary in Use, and especially the upper intermediate edition, is great for building up your vocabulary expertise. Each unit usually comprises 2 parts, in case you don't know, the theory section and the second part, the practice section, where you can put the newly acquired knowledge into practice. This little purple book, New Insight into IELTS, a personal favorite by Vanessa Jakeman and Claire McDowell, is colorful, informative, and really useful in general. A huge recommendation from me. Barron's IELTS practice exams is no piece of cake. Some researchers would probably say that it might be a little bit outdated, whereas others still consider it to be the cream of the crop. So just in case, you can take a look at it. Vocabulary for IELTS with answers is useful and valuable since it's quite specific. And tailors the requirements to, better to say, it tailors the study materials to the format of the exam, which is really important. The same goes for this book, Grammar for IELTS with Answers, which is a self-study grammar reference book by Diane Hopkins and Pauline Cullen. Another personal favorite, Ready for IELTS by Sam McCarter, an all-embracing book that touches upon all the main aspects and gives a lot of useful tips as well. Colorful, interesting, up-to-date. 4 more jewels. This is a series published by Collins Press, which focuses on specific IELTS aspects. So here you can see you have listening for IELTS, speaking for IELTS, writing for IELTS, and finally reading for IELTS. This series can really come in handy if you experience problems with a specific section and you want to have a deeper understanding, a deeper knowledge of what is required from you and the secrets which might help you in your success. Coming up next, of course, paper-based textbooks are not the one and only source of IELTS information. Now we live in an internet-based society, and all those websites which I picked out for you are very, very handy and practical. Most of them free of charge. Some of them unfortunately require a subscription, but still take them into consideration. The Global English Portal, IELTS List, IELTS Buddy, IELTS Mentor, and all the rest of them, including IELTS tutorials and TED Talks. In general, TED Talks is a wondrous resource for developing your listening comprehension and listening ability. The topics are quite fresh and they might catch your interest. Coming up next, the common mistakes. Those are the mistakes that the majority of students come across while dealing with IELTS. So you have to be very careful maneuvering around them. First things first, misunderstanding the question. It might apply to the reading section or the writing section, to all the sections actually. For example, you're required to fill the gaps using no more than 2 words, but in reality, the student uses 4 words, and that is a mistake. So you should stick to what is required of you without strain. Or point number 2, changing the subject in the writing test. Even though you write something as complicated as War and Peace, you still won't be complimented on it unless it corresponds with the topic that you're given. Mispronouncing. Don't confuse accents and pronunciation. They're not one and the same thing. Lack of paraphrasing. Very often, guys and girls that tend to phrase their answers in exactly the same way as the examiners, that is a no-no. You should always demonstrate your ability to use synonyms in IELTS, to use different constructions that mean the same. In other words, you should be able to paraphrase. Never ever leave blank answers. A lot of us are perfectionists who would prefer to give no answer at all than risk demonstrating their inability and giving an incorrect answer. Don't do that. If you put in something, anything at all, a letter, a word, there's always the opportunity that you might be lucky and guess the correct answer. So no blank answers. Spelling errors and poor vocabulary is another common mistake. Like I said, in listening task 1, a lot of spelling will be involved, a lot of proper names, a lot of surnames, and very often people make mistakes here. They didn't concentrate on it because they think, spelling, that's elementary level, sure thing, I can do it. As practice shows, not all of us can. Poor vocabulary. And by poor, I mean oversimplified. Try not to use the vocabulary that is too common. Strive for more elevated and academic synonyms, especially in the writing section. Time management. You should always remember that the universe doesn't stretch in front of you, and your time's not endless. There are a lot of questions and only a limited amount of time in which to deal with them. So you should probably do a lot of practice tests beforehand to be able to manage your time correctly without overspending and puzzling over one single question. If you get stuck, it's better to move on. That's a golden rule. The next one, talking too much or talking too little. Some people are sure of themselves and they start bragging about really talking too much, showing off, trying to show the examiner in the speaking part everything they've got. That is a road to hell. Unfortunately, it irritates some examiners. And the same goes for talking too little. If you stall, if you pause, if the information has to be dragged out of you, that is a significant minus. Not learning the band descriptors in IELTS writing and speaking. I already talked about it today. 4 key criteria that you should stick to in an ironclad way. It's always better to know the format like the back of your hand. the format, the criteria, to know the requirements, to know exactly what will be expected of you, and providing it and giving it to the examiners, and getting high points as a result. Another mistake would be leaving out data in IELTS writing task 1. For instance, you're giving a chart, a bar chart, a bar chart, a pie chart, a table, and you don't show and demonstrate all the tendencies, all the main tendencies given in the chart. That will cost you some points. In the same way, providing unclear overviews for IELTS writing task 1 will also cost you some points. And in case you've forgotten, overviews are the first clear, ideally clear and ideally concise sentences given in writing task 1 of the academic module. Don't give 2 sentences, don't give 3 sentences, do not beat about the bush. Be concise and be laconic. That will really contribute to the appreciation of the examiners. And I think that is more or less it when it comes to the main tips of what to do and what not to do when you prepare for IELTS. Very often it might take you no more than a couple of months to complete your preparation. Of course, it depends on your initial level, and it's far easier for somebody upper intermediate to get a 7.5 band. Try to surround yourself with the language in all ways possible. Listen to something every day, whether it's a podcast or your favorite music. Watch TV shows, TED Talks, get a Netflix or Aurora.tv subscription to master different accents and get the hang of them. Try to get a pen friend or a speaking friend. Fortunately now Skype can give you all the opportunities in the world, and not only Skype, and communicate with a native preferably. Get him or her to correct your mistakes and get you in the loop of fluent English speaking. And probably you can also go through a mock version of the test in advance, which is available in Russia and costs much less than the original exam. It's about 3,000 rubles, if I'm not mistaken. It'll show you how well you can deal with the exam, with the real version of the exam then and there. It's a placement test of sorts. Go ahead and try it. And now I'll try to, if my computer allows me to, I'll try to show you the way the speaking section of the IELTS test is done with quite a talented young woman